Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Reimagining Work podcast with me, John Wenger.
And me, Rogi Noord.
And today's theme is feedback and distortion. So we're just going to spend some time making lots of screechy noises with our technology, making lots of feedback and distortion.
I should have plugged in my guitar.
There you go. It comes out of a conversation around learning in the workplace, getting feedback about ourselves, learning about ourselves, and people that are in the role of coach or facilitator in some way. And I think, for me, my starting point sometimes with this conversation is when I hear the word feedback, I just go, my skin crawls sometimes when I hear, depending on the context is being discussed. I just really don't like feedback. And I'll explain what that means, obviously. Years ago, a teacher of mine, we were in a kind of professional stroke personal development context, and there was this word feedback that people kept kicking around, and he said, look, can we have a conversation about feedback? Feedback is what happens when you've got a microphone next to your phone, or the noise a guitar makes through a speaker. It's that kind of dissonant screech. And often when you talk about giving feedback or receiving feedback, that's how it's received, because it's this sort of real grating white noise that comes back. With all best intentions, people think it's important to give information about how you're performing at work or what you're doing that could be different. But it's about how this is delivered that often means when the people are receiving it comes across exactly as that sort of mechanical feedback, this sort of white noise that doesn't mean anything and is just repellent.
Is it relatable to bedside manners, where you have just...
I think so.
Because I was just thinking about an orthocologist, like a cancer doctor, or any doctor for that matter, who has to deliver bad news. I mean, that takes some skill. And if you don't have it, you can either have a very good feedback, or a very good day or very bad day. And I'm just hearing some feedback in the back, but I think it was one of my dogs dreaming. So that was no, but it's important for those kind of people and for many others that they have a certain even training. I don't know if they actually have that training, but I'm sure that it can be very handy if they actually do have it. And in that sense, I think what you're talking about is that, for instance, the self or the evaluation cycles that I went through, and you do that with somebody in HR or a manager, they might know how to work the tool, and they might know how to interpret a graph or some data, but they can't possibly fathom the implications of such a tool on somebody's personality. And there should be some background training or some sort of psychological development for those kind of people, that they know that these things can have a negative effect on somebody, which you cannot repair as a manager, because you're simply not equipped for that.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that there will be lots of, I suppose, diagnostic tools that you need accreditation for before you're allowed to use them. But there will be others that the depth of what gets exposed when people receive information about themselves, people can't possibly be prepared for. I mean, it's from one of my things, because I use an experiential technique called role training. One of my things is pet hates is the dreaded role play. We'll do the seminar lecture stuff in the morning, and then in the afternoon we'll have the dreaded role play. And it's dreaded because I've been in situations where somebody who may not have had much depth of training around what happens puts people in scenarios and is frozen when people react in a particular way that's unexpected. That kind of, for me, is a given. People are unexpected. There's no kind of necessarily predictability about how people behave. You put them in a role play situation where they're having to pretend to do something or be something that maybe they're not, and they react in ways which confound the facilitator. So there has to be some sort of depth of training, I think, if you're going to use a technique like a diagnostic tool or a role play, because people will be people, and you can't really predict what will come out. What you can do is have some sort of training in how you respond to the unexpected. But often some of that feedback stuff is delivered in a very clumsy sort of way, without giving much thought as to how the other person might be receiving it. I think that kind of comes back to earlier conversations about the necessity to develop strong empathy for people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there wouldn't be any. Also, in my experience, then you establish something, usually something that's not good, because obviously focusing on the positive is something that you don't need to do because you don't want to change that. And so you focus on the negative, and but just acknowledging it or just being aware of the negative is one thing. A problem with with diagnostics like that is there's no follow-up. I mean, there's no if at best it gets written down, and at best in 6 months' time it gets acknowledged that it was written down, and then you'll reach the point where they'll say, well, have you done anything about that? And you go like, how am I supposed to do that? I mean, if I could change my character like that, and just because you ask, then I would be able to do anything, literally, because then I could change anything of myself at any time just by thinking about it. And it doesn't work that way. Some things need a lot of work, and some behaviors are pretty deep and from your childhood or long time ago, and very, very well embedded, and you don't just, and managers don't know how to do that, right? I mean, they cannot anticipate the gravity of some elements in your character, and expose them and then do nothing with them. I mean, that would be not good, I think.
I remember a conversation that we had many years ago, and it was with an HR person, and we were talking about the general state of the business, and she said, "Oh, we've just done this 360 at the senior team. The CEO and the rest of the senior team have done 360s," and we went, "Oh, right, okay." For me, that sort of signifies that it's the starting point of something else. You do something with it. And so we said, "So what was the result?" And she said, "Well, they all just felt destroyed on a personal level by the information they got back. So they asked me to bury the information and that we would never do a 360 again." Which, one, doesn't surprise me that if somebody felt like that. Two, it says something to me about the way that the information was presented, because it's not easy to receive information about ourselves sometimes, whether it's good or bad. So we need somebody who's skilled at delivering it. But also that kind of we don't like what it's uncovered. Let's hide this away in a locked filing cabinet and never speak of it again is sad, because what other opportunities for growth or development had they may have shut off because of the fear and the negative experience that they'd had about this?
It is valuable information, right?
Totally.
Especially when you do it right, and when you have a proper survey, something that really gets to the point and is well interpreted, then the information that comes out of it, whether it's negative or positive, is extremely valuable. But there has to be a plan in place. Going back to a doctor, for instance, especially when it's cancer related or something like that. He wouldn't just call you into his office and say, "Well, Mr. Wenger, sorry, you have cancer. It's lunch." They don't do that. They go like, you have cancer. This is the kind of cancer you have, and this is the treatment. These are your odds. Sometimes they're pretty good. Sometimes there's a fair chance. Sometimes there isn't. But we have a process, or we have, in some cases, even a cure, or at least a treatment. And that's what you want when you get feedback like that. Um, yes, give me feedback. And then you go, Rogier, we went over this and this and this and that. Isn't as you might want it to have in the position that you're holding right now, or maybe it is something in general that you want to improve on. Obviously, first we mentioned the positive thing, so there's something to feel good about, and then you can go to the not necessarily bad things, but things that might need a little bit of work, and then you can bring them up, and then you go like, and this and this and this is what we can do about it. We have a program,
absolutely.
we have a goal, we have something that you can actually improve on it, and that would be very helpful.
It's a mirror to the situation described with the doctor breaking the news about cancer. You don't do that without knowing what resources are in place around.
Exactly.
As a follow-on. So yes, there is the bad news to impart about a cancer diagnosis, perhaps, or there's the difficult information that you're going to present someone with result some sort of diagnostic. But I think it's important. I think in the workplace, that professional development, the line between professional development and personal development has become very blurred. Mm-hmm. So to say that you're going to offer a kind of a tool or provide some feedback to someone without their consent, I think is problematic, because there's less information, I think, that you can impart to someone about their workplace behavior that's not about the person themselves. So you're basically making comment on the person, and I think that's the sort of thing. Just thinking about myself, I would like to be invited into that conversation. So would you be interested to know this stuff about you? Yes. How about we do this diagnostic survey?
Yeah,
or whatever. So there's got to be an element of agency. Otherwise, it's something that's being done to me, and I don't go along with that.
And many with you, many others. I mean, as soon as you make something mandatory, then it becomes
onerous.
What?
Onerous.
Onerous.
Onerous. Repellent.
Oh yeah, sure.
People will reject, I think, if you make
yeah,
things
yeah. But it's a natural defense. I mean, it's a default attitude that people will have against something that's very mandatory. I mean, how can you be completely neutral? And if somebody doesn't want to hear it, then he might, for instance, for starters, not be honest during the survey, because there's nothing to gain, to be honest. So it might as well, I can play the game, I can play the survey, I can give answers that I know are going to be, towards something else than I'd actually be. And I think that is pretty default behavior of people if you force them into anything. And especially with these things, because obviously, because I was thinking earlier that you have different degrees of survey, right? I mean, there are, even a 360 can be very confronting, obviously, because somebody's going to say something about you that you didn't know, probably, but also experienced. But then there's all the way up to role reversal. If you don't do it properly, and if you don't have a proper follow-up, then it can do a lot of damage in a person or in a professional relationship. And so there are many degrees in how far, because you can have a survey in a casual conversation. You can ask certain questions as a manager to get a feel of, you can ask an employee, dude, you happy? That's a survey. That gives you information with which you can do something.
Absolutely. The danger with people in managerial positions asking that questions, I sometimes think it's useful for the manager or the person asking what's behind the question. So if you're asking, are you happy in your work? Are you looking as a manager for recognition or acknowledgement or a pat in the back? Are you doing a good job as a manager? Because what happens if the person says, well, frankly, no, there's some areas that I'm not happy with. You then are in the position of going, well, I reject you and your opinions, or, oh, now I have to do something about it. So don't ask the question unless you really want to hear the answer. I think also there's a question both on the side of the asking for the feedback and the giving of the feedback. I mean, to use the word that I detest. But dare I say, in the world of work, there needs to be love and positive regard for each other. Because I don't know that you're doing a disservice by telling something to someone that they may not see about themselves. I mean, we all have a blind spot. The clue is in the term. We all have blind spots. So there has to be some sort of positive regard. If I'm going to tell you something about yourself that you don't see about yourself, I have to love you and have regard for you, I think, as a human being. Otherwise, it's a weapon. Likewise, if I ask you the question, hey, tell me some stuff that you think would help me improve in my work, I have to have love and trust for you that you're going to be doing this for my benefit and that will be, for the benefit of the whole. Otherwise, again, it's used as a weapon.
Yeah, taking that into consideration, a question like, are you happy, depending on the relationship, can be interpreted in many ways. I mean, if you have, I think, in my opinion, a little bit of a default where there's a command and structure and command and control structure, and a manager is conceived as somebody who's not really competent and blah, 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 blah. The standard, I don't like my job thing, and your manager would ask, well, are you happy in your work? Then my first reaction would be, why? Am I doing something wrong? What do you want to know, right? Instead of answering it honestly and openly, you'd get defensive. And because, obviously there's something going on. Obviously I need to protect myself. And obviously you do not have the best interest of me at heart. And so I'm going to defend myself. So I'm not going to answer that. I'm pleading the fifth.
Yeah. Which, I think probably happens more often than not. People plead the fifth. I think that people think I'm not gonna upset things here. I'm gonna say something which is not too controversial by and large.
Of course.
The same. I mean, I think there's the same if you ask that of an individual, but also if you ask an organization. Those so-called engagement surveys. You kind of get this uncomfortable information back that a lot of people aren't engaged. Well, so what are you going to do about it? So the same thing goes for a person. If you're going to ask this, do a survey or do a diagnostic, there needs to be something in place to follow up with it. What's the point of doing it? But if you're going to do like an engagement survey or organization-wide, you have to think this is leading to something. It's not just for the sake of doing it. Because on a bigger picture, managers do the same thing. We don't like those results. Let's bury them. Let's never ask the question again.
Because I have to report on it. I mean, if there's, especially when there's like an official program running down the company or trickling down, then you have to give feedback to your superiors. And if at some point it turns out that your own performance, for instance, isn't very positive, if the question is asked by your managers, like, are you happy in your job? And you go like, is this something that goes on the record and goes upstairs? Yes, it is. Well, I'm not happy with you.
Yes, that's right.
And then it gets buried because, as a manager, I don't want that information going up. So I'm not going to do that.
One of the most entertaining and concise blog posts that I've read for a while, this is some months ago. It was a short blog post as well, and the title was it the most useful question you could be asked in a performance review. And this was the entire blog post, and it said, "What's getting in the way of you doing good work?"
Yeah, exactly.
That was it. Imagine if performance conversations, which are a part of a form of this sort of whole feedback thing that we're talking about, if the question was asked of the person and invited. It was an open question, so it invited anything that they wanted to say. What gets in the way of you doing good work?
Can you imagine the company or the company environment, the company culture that would need to exist in order to be able to A, ask the question, and B, answer the question in an open and honest way.
Yeah. Fascinating. I mean, it would be probably a pretty good place to work at,
Yeah.
because you would feel that you had some input into how things happened and how work happened for people and so on, and that you were able to make decisions on behalf of customers, those sorts of things. But yeah, I think by and large, those sorts of questions we don't get asked them, and they don't get asked. People are scared of the answer, because also there's that thing, I think, for most people. Oh well, I've heard the answer. Do I have to now do something about that? Or if I don't do something about that, my credibility goes down. Or it sometimes is sort of shoved aside of, well, that's great. We've done the survey, or we've done the diagnostic, or we've asked the questions, or we've had the performance reviews. Now let's just sit and wait and see what changes over the next year. Almost as if it's like, well, we've talked about it, so that's enough. Just talking about it's enough to create some change.
Which obviously far from it.
Yeah. There is a beginning piece, I think, right at the beginning sometimes. There's an expression I sometimes use, a thing observed is a thing changed. So in some cases, when you discover something about yourself, that a blind spot, you go, wow, I didn't know. In some cases, it might be that you decide, I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to change how I relate to people, or I organize myself, or something like that. But it's not to say that's always the case. Not always the case that a thing observed is a thing changed. If only it were that easy.
If only.
If only it were that easy.
No. And especially with people, especially with people who are in a company which is looking to change, because that's, when you talk about the future of work, there's two ways of getting there. If you have a new company and you build it up in a certain fashion, or you have an existing company that you want to change into a more social environment, if you will, then it takes a lot of work. Installing an enterprise social network and having somebody do a status update or share a document is not what you... it's only a very small part of a social business. So the social platform is not a given path to a social business. There's a lot more to it. And changing an environment within a company is not just the CEO saying, look, people, we're changing the environment now to a more open and trustworthy environment. I'm going to start by saying something. I'm going to share a secret with you just to get things going. Yeah, for instance. And now it's going to need the behavior of everybody within the company to adapt to that new environment. And managers, especially middle management, has a very important role to play in that, I think. And you don't change companies, you change people. Right?
Well, to extend that, I think people change. It comes back to the point I was making earlier about somebody saying, we're going to do this 360 on you, and then we're going to put you through this coaching program. Well, where's my consent? Where's my agency? I think there's a related thing there. So it's not about changing people, but people change. There's something that needs to go on with the inspirers, with the influencers, about the vision and the benefits and the building the case for people to enlist themselves, not to change. I'm not going to change you, but I'm gonna craft this vision, and I'm gonna see if I can get people to craft it with me, and see if we can get as much involvement and engagement with this thing as possible. I mean, it sounds lovely and utopian, but I think that is part of the role of anybody who's an influencer in an organization.
Yeah,
to have
it's
that
why
bigger
you
picture.
need I think in part why the term evangelist has risen to the surface, other than in a very religious format. It is truly that. I mean, you need to if you want to have a change that big, you need people to realize that the change is happening, that there are certain benefits to it for everybody, not just the company, but also especially as an individual, there's benefits, and then you have to convince that person that they want to participate in that change. And I'm not saying that that person needs to change, but he or she wants to participate in the change. So they want to um, be part of it, be able to make that change. And if it turns out that something within their character is holding them back, then there needs to be something in place that can help them adapt to that. Because these changes, I mean, changing a business into a social business, it's fundamental. And there is definitely some people that are going to be very conflicted about it. Obviously, there's going to be like early adopters. They're going to jump in no matter what. And then you have those that are going to play ball regardless because somebody else is doing it. So, yeah, fine. But there's also going to be people that are not going to do anything. And then there are going to be people who are going to be struggling, that want to be part of it, but have difficulty opening up, for instance, or being able to take a certain level of criticism when you put a status update on the social network within the company. These people need to be guided to a certain level of engagement and a certain level of openness. And with some, it's going to be very difficult, but they would want to participate, so they would ask for the help, and then it should be given.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you've talked before about the need. Well, one of the characteristics of a social business is transparency. So when information is available for people, I think it allows those ones who may be a little bit reluctant to find out more. And what's in this for me? Why would I want to buy into this change in the way we do things? So I think transparency is also the means as well as the end, if you see what I mean. So I think there is a role for conversations that allow people to enlist themselves into it. So certainly you'll have people reluctant to change if you're going to be revolutionizing how they do their work and how they relate to each other. Certainly, I think the two key drivers I remember learning years ago when I was working as a therapist. We are driven towards pleasure and away from pain, and change is generally, for most people's experience, not pleasurable and is painful. So we will avoid those things that seem onerous to us because it's not pleasurable and it is painful. So there is a role for information and transparency in the way of getting there too, and with as least distortion as possible. Because I think if people don't get the chance to make up their own minds about this, if they can't, to use a very hackneyed phrase, buy into or get on board,
opt in,
they ain't going to do it. And I speak for myself as well. I am not averse to learning and changing and developing, but when it feels like it's being imposed, or it's smoke and mirrors and there's things that I'm not being included in, there's information that I'm not being shared with, that's not being shared with me, I will be a little bit hesitant.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why so many initiatives fail, because that's exactly how it happens. I mean, I'm just working and I get an email and there's something, this is how we're going to do it as of Monday. And I'm like, well, go fish. I'm not going to do it. I'm perfectly happy the way things are working now. I'm not going to change anything. Why would I?
So this is the whole thing. We want to change how we work. We want to. There's going to require new behaviors of all of us. So then sometimes that's where these sort of measures come into place. They do 360s, or they do some diagnostic, or they do an engagement survey, and they try and put their finger on the pulse of what's going on. But I think that they've missed a piece of, have we got people with us in order to do these things? So we've taken a pulse, we've measured the organization. These are the new behaviors that we're all going to have to learn. These are the new values. Really? Based on what? And then they get lots of feedback because we're doing it in a social way now. There's an initiative to do it social, and they start to get feedback. They get feedback. And it is exactly that. That screeching noise.
And then untrained people are gonna try and interpret everything, and then you get distorted information. You know, and wrong perceptives, and I don't know, a lot of really weird viewpoints of how things need to be, and just read a book and then everything. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, you need to read a lot of books and talk to a lot of people in order to get a certain grasp of a certain change. And I'm talking about myself now. I mean, there's not really a study you can follow in order to become a social business expert, I think. As a psychologist, yes, there is a study that you need to do in order to understand what it is that you're talking about, and then there's certain training in order to be able to interpret these feedback forms. But it's not just the interpretation, but also the communication of these things. Like, we were getting back to the doctor again, who has to deliver bad news. I mean, there's a lot of things that come with trying and to change somebody for the better, and you don't just do it. You don't send an HR employee on a seminar for a day and then give him one of the more powerful tools in order to get in somebody's head and expect everything to work out. It just simply doesn't work that way. In my experience, it has never worked that way, and I've done a few, and it just doesn't. There's only, if anything happens, it's only enhancing the gap between a manager and the employee, or the HR and the employee. It makes it more numerical.
Yeah.
It makes it more static. It
doesn't
create any.
It reinforces that picture of people being resources.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're not.
Yeah.
We all know that. Work is not a transaction, and people are not resources.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I throw in another thing in part of this whole thing? This whole thing about learn and change and feedback and information. Another one of the things that makes my skin crawl is the word resistance. Because I don't believe that people are resistant. It's a bit controversial, and I'll explain what I mean by that. We talk about changing, or you get feedback, or you do a diagnostic or a survey or a 360 or blah, blah, blah. It comes back to the reason I thought about this is I was thinking about your cancer oncologist analogy, that it's about the bedside manner. So how information is delivered to people, whether that information is about a new way of doing things or new processes, or the information is about the people and how they are at work. It's how it's delivered. And I think that clumsy delivery sometimes is the thing that gets people's backs up. That it feels like you have now taken a step back and you've got to do a lot of recovery to get people on board. Mm-hmm. I think there's an art, I think, to communicating this stuff, which goes beyond seeing people as resources and work as a transaction. Like, what is the way that we can communicate information, any information, about myself, about the workplace, about changes, about the environment, about the vision? What is the way that we can communicate that, which will most warm people up into seeing the benefits, or seeing the positive, or seeing the growth, or the why we would go along with some new information? And I think that's a $64,000 question. Really, it's not like there's a manual that says this is the way you say it and this is the way you don't say it.
I think that's like the big thing in social business at the moment. I mean, you can have they calculate ROI, and they have a long list of potential benefits and a long list of reasons, and you can with the right graphs or the right slides, you can convince a CEO or the board
on some level.
You can. It's business. If you take the business aspect of social business, then it's not impossible to convince a company to at least look into it, and then you can do a survey, and then or an analysis of the business and go like, well, these that's where you can improve and this and that and such and such. And that's not the hard part. But at some point, you're going to have to deal with people.
Yes.
And then communication is going to be key into how you are going to deal with these people, and how are you going to get them to change, and how are you going to get them to participate, and how are you going to get them to do that survey in order to improve the way that they are working or whatever. And
if that's that last bit, improve the way we're working. So the picture we're reimagining as workers is more social. So the way we're working, I think that's where the challenge is, because the way we're working is about how I am as a human being. The way we're working in a reimagined workplace is more empathetic towards others, is a better active listener towards others, is one who's able more to accept diverse types of human beings in my workplace, whether I like them or not. How do I accept people who are different from me? That's where the challenge is, because it's not just the new way of working is using these social platforms and but it's how I'm going to relate. And that's, I think, the scary thing for people is this is the what's in it for me is also the what's the cost to me. You mean I have to be a different person?
Of course, because there's no such thing as a free lunch, and especially in the current society that we live in, when you ask something of somebody, then they're going to want something in return, and they're going to probably wonder indeed, what's it going to cost me? Why? Because I kind of have to say that resistance is something that in many current cultural environments is almost a default attitude, and it's really, really sad. But I think that is something that's bred into it over a long period of time, where people go not necessarily resist, but distrust.
Yes.
In what it is that they want, and let's face it, they've got every reason, right, to distrust, because it hasn't been good, and they have been effed over many times, and they haven't gotten that raise, and they haven't gotten that promotion, and the cultural environment within the company isn't really something that you hoo-ha about, and now all of a sudden they come up with this new scheme in order to control us even better, because now we have to share everything on an open environment. So there's no hiding anywhere anymore now.
It's very symptomatic of our times, really, isn't it? I mean, the trust in many of our institutions and our authority figures and our leaders is just at such a low generally. So it doesn't surprise me that that's the same in our workplaces as well.
It carries through.
It carries through.
Both ways.
I'll read something that a friend of mine put as a comment in one of my articles. Is genuine learning and I would say change. Genuine learning implies birthing new consciousness. I can entirely go along with that. Looking and really seeing, and therein lies a problem, as raw conscious awareness can be painful. And I think that's what I was saying about there's no such thing as resistance. We do avoid pain and we want to move towards pleasure. And new information about how we are at work and what we may have to do differently can be a little raw for us. I think it's about the bedside manner. It's how that stuff is presented. Where does it fit? And then, trust in a relationship between people delivering the information has to be, I said love and regard earlier. I think it's implicit. It has to be there. Otherwise, people will reject that stuff as just foreign and alien, and I want nothing to do with what you're telling me.
I think it's pretty classical. I mean, if you take any environment or any society where behavior is forced, in the end, it always falls down.
Yeah.
It never holds up.
Yeah. Ewan talks about this, doesn't he? He talks about initiatives fail. I agree. Social initiatives fail because they're initiatives, somebody else imposing. It falls down. They just fall down.
Yeah, like I said, you get an email where it says that you have to behave in a certain way, and then everything's gonna be better. And
Yeah.
no, it's not. But if you have a manager, or I prefer if you have a leader, preferably somebody who's a little bit charismatic, and employees trust, and a good solid relationship on which you can actually build something, then it's, I think, relatively easy in order to adapt something new, because the environment is there. And but yeah, if you have managers that ridicule their employees on every other day, every opportunity they get, and has no sense of humor, and is just somebody old school that really dislikes any change or any influence from anybody, then yeah, right. If you're gonna do my evaluation, I'm not gonna bare my soul to you and do some sort of survey where I expose myself to you. I don't know what you're gonna do with that information. Probably something bad. Quite likely you're gonna use it against me. So I'm not gonna do that. I am going to resist.
And therein we enter the whole realm of empowerment, which could be the topic of another podcast.
Yeah.
Which is probably a thing that both of us have lots to say about empowerment. Yeah.
Yes, we have.
But for episode 10, I think we have.
It's a milestone episode, isn't it?
It is a milestone episode. I've enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
Yes.
Yeah. So from me, John Wenger.
And me, Rogi Noord.
That's a farewell until next time.
Yes, and if you want to subscribe to our podcast, you can go to iTunes or Stitcher. You can find us on the blog. You can go to rwcast.com. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Goodbye.